If you ask most Bravo fans to rank the franchises of The Real Housewives, Dallas will be at the bottom of nearly everyone's list. Though it had some fun moments, it never reached the iconic status that cities like Atlanta and New York have, and at this point, after 5 seasons, the show seems deader than LeeAnne's relationship with her castmates. It's worth noting that Bravo hasn't officially canceled it, they've just said that they don't have plans to bring it back, but unless it heads to Peacock, it's not seeming likely that we'll see the ladies of Dallas anytime soon. Since we've had about a year to digest the show's final season, I wanted to explore why the show ended up being such a flop. It wasn't for lack of wealth or kooky characters or fabulous trips, so I wanted to really analyze the show and try and get my finger on the pulse of what went wrong. I think the best way to structure this video is to go into Dallas's unique identity and ascertain how each aspect may have helped or harmed the show. I'm going to break it up into chunks so it's a little bit more digestible. I'll put timestamps in the description just in case you want to skip around. Okay, enough disclaimers, let's get into the meat of the video. So the first aspect of Dallas's identity is its focus on social standing and reputation. More than any other show, there was a heavy emphasis on what others thought of the ladies. Dallas started out as a show about women involved with the charity scene before becoming a housewife show. The talk of charity died with season 2, but the focus on reputation and the importance of being mindful of who you're associating with lived on, especially with the sophomore season additions of Simmons and Kameron Westcott, both of whom are members of prominent Dallas old money families. This focus led to a lot of drama over who the ladies should be associating with and brought up a lot of interesting subtext on social class. We had ladies like Kameron, Hendra, and to a lesser degree Cary Deuber, who grew up with wealth and social status, facing tension with women like Brandi Redmond, LeeAnne Locken, and Tiffany Hollman, who didn't grow up as haves, so to speak. A big running theme was the more upper-crust women not wanting to associate with Brandi, as she took pride in not giving in to the established social order, doing things like showing up to the most prestigious charity function of the year with fake dog poop on her hat.
Brandi's hat, she might as well just walked up to every woman there and went, "Bitch slap, I'm here."
Both Kameron and LeeAnne, who didn't grow up rich herself but puts a lot of deference into this social order of Dallas, really went hard on Brandi. We get a storyline in season 3 where the two go after Hendra when she buddies up to Brandi, leading to accusations that Hendra had a drinking problem. It seems as if they have higher standards for Hendra as she comes from a high-status family and they feel that she has more at stake with regards to her reputation. We also see early on that Stephanie gets targeted a bit for her association with Brandi.
You know what? Your charity world is going to go down the toilet.
She fits in a bit more with the upper crust society, so she's continually warned about what others may be thinking. This creates some tension with Stephanie and Brandi's friendship. We also see this play out with LeeAnne Locken's quest to fit in with Dallas society, despite her background as a carny kid and never really being all that wealthy. She's actually able to carve out a niche in the charity world by being more of a doer than a donator, and with her deference towards the status quo, she seems to ingratiate herself into this society. It's actually interesting to compare her to Brandi, who does have a lot of money, but due to her lack of respect for the culture, she never really is accepted. So does this help or harm the franchise? I think it depends on who you ask. I personally think it's one of the most interesting things about Dallas, but I'm kind of a sociology nerd. I think it also made for a lot of drama that feels petty and ultimately lighthearted. I'd much rather take Kameron telling Hendra to be mindful of her reputation over some of the heavier drama we got in later seasons. I do see, however, that this kind of talk can be really triggering for a lot of people. We saw Brandi break down over being called trash by Kameron.
Go suck a dick. That was trash. I'm done with you.
Which was pretty heart-wrenching to watch. It can also make some of the ladies seem kind of out of touch and focused on what's not really important in life, but I think that's just kind of the nature of the Real Housewives. One thing about this also is that it seems to have made the series somewhat difficult to cast. It's worth noting that neither Cam nor Hendra were really born into this Highland Park lifestyle, and I have to wonder if someone who was would ever join the show. The way they present this subculture makes it seem to be very closed off to the cameras. It seems as if Dallas high society looks down on the show more than other cities where the Housewives flag has been planted. Brandi talks in season 1 about her girls being asked to leave the private school they were at, and we never had Hendra or Kameron bring any of their friends from this world onto the show, so I have to wonder if this could be part of the reason why. Still, I enjoyed this small peek we got into this world through the show. The second aspect of Dallas is the ladies' reliance on pranks. This started out with potty humor in season 1, almost exclusively from Brandi and Stephanie, but proved to be wildly unpopular with the audience. Producers encouraged the ladies to channel this energy into pranking their cast members, which they easily transitioned into with Kameron Westcott as the usual target. At some points, nearly all of the ladies joined in on the fun, but Stephanie and Brandi held the title of prankster princesses throughout the series run. Now, this wasn't an aspect of Dallas I was crazy about, but it's not really my personal sense of humor. It did give the show a lighter feel, and it was fun to see Kameron get in a tizzy, but I think it also made the show feel a bit juvenile. The women always seem much younger and less sophisticated than the women on other franchises, and I think this was part of the reason why. The third aspect in Dallas's identity is two fairly unique relationships we saw on the show. The first was the friendship between Stephanie and Brandi, who had been best friends for years prior to the show beginning, and you really feel the depth of their bond throughout the show's run. We see just how close they are right from the first season when Brandi leans on Steph during some marital issues. Though they have a very brief falling out in the opening episodes of season 2, despite LeeAnne's best efforts, their beef is quickly squashed, and the two remain a united front throughout the entirety of the series. I think it's refreshing to see a friendship that's so strong and real, and it's what a lot of people really remember about the show. Even though we have women on other franchises who have formed very close bonds, nobody seems to be as tight and as real as the two of them. With the closeness of their husbands, who are also best friends, and having kids roughly the same age, their lives seem totally interwoven. I think that this is definitely a strong point of this series, but in the end, it started to work against Stephanie, who was forced to defend Brandi's actions to the point where fans started to turn on her. The second unique relationship was that between D'Andra and her mother, Mama D. The first I ever saw of The Real Housewives of Dallas was a sit-down between Mama D and D'Andra, and I was totally enthralled. They give exactly what you would expect from a Dallas franchise. Even if I'm absolutely terrified of Mama D, I still find her so watchable. We have a lot of complex relationships between mothers and daughters across the Housewives universe, but something about the Simmons girls is just so story-like. We have the tension of Mama D holding D'Andra's trust fund and business over her head, and see D constantly undermining her daughter. I think Mama D is one of the most memorable people from Dallas by far. I wish she could have been a housewife, to be honest. She really has that star quality about her. And of course, we've got to talk about the aspect of Dallas that really did the series in, which was its relationship with racism and racial insensitivity. 3 separate housewives had major racism scandals, and they weren't just side characters like Jenny Wynn on Salt Lake City. They were the true heavy lifters in LeeAnne Locken, Brandi Redmond, and Kameron Westcott. For the first 3 seasons of the show, the cast was all white with the exception of OG one-season wonder Tiffany Hendra, who is half Asian, though her race wasn't really touched upon on the show. With the introduction of Kary Brittingham in season 4, who is proud of her Mexican heritage, the cracks started to show. LeeAnne Locken seemed to hate her from the get-go, seemingly finding Kary's own troubled childhood to be a bit threatening to her identity. The two sparred several times about who had the harder upbringing, but when the women took a trip to Thailand, things got ugly. LeeAnne's sole ally for the past few seasons had been Kameron, so when Kameron and Kary started to get close, LeeAnne seemed to be triggered. It's worth noting that on the day that LeeAnne had her big meltdown, a few things happened to deeply trigger her. The ladies visited an elephant sanctuary, and LeeAnne felt a bond with the abused elephants as she had worked with animals when she was a child on the carnival and also felt a bit broken herself. Later that evening, the women had a memorable night in the red light district in which they attended an infamous ping pong show. This also triggered LeeAnne, seemingly twice over, as she didn't like that they were supporting sex workers and also was concerned about Kameron's reputation. She proceeded to go on a tirade to Kameron in which she targeted Kary for bringing them to the red light district, bringing up Kary's Mexican heritage in a disparaging way multiple times. Kameron eventually tells the other ladies, including Kary, what LeeAnne had said, who was confronted both at the finale event and in the reunion. This was interesting because everyone seemed to be surprised that this aired, as it seemed to have been an off-camera pattern for LeeAnne. Here's a clip of Stephanie talking about the situation on Watch What Happens Live that I found to be fairly revealing.
Was she telling you that this wouldn't air on the show?
She was very nervous for it to air. In the past, she's done some things that have been horrible, and I feel like they've always kind of protected her. And I always felt like it was because she does contribute so much. So I do not think any of us thought that it would ever make the light of day because it was so dark and it was so crazy, and she's been protected so much.
Brandi especially was harsh on LeeAnne at the reunion, which made it pretty ironic when a video resurfaced of her mocking Asian accents right after the reunion aired. LeeAnne was let go from the show going into season 5, but Brandi remained on, and when the new season opened, we saw a very grim Brandi. She was obviously very remorseful for her actions, whether it was truly because she hurt Asian people or if it was due to the hate she got online. We saw a very different Brandi, and she was pretty off her game for the entire season. To make things more awkward, we had the introduction of housewife Dr. Tiffany Moon, who is Chinese American and very connected with her ethnic culture. Right off the bat, Tiffany put into perspective for Brandi how harmful some of these stereotypes Brandi exploited in her video were.
I knew not a lick of English, not a lick. And I went to school, and people did this thing. They did this thing to me.
From there, Brandi was mostly in the background this entire season, and when she did engage, it was mostly to express how uncomfortable she was around Tiffany because it brought out the shame she felt towards what she'd done, which didn't go down very well with the viewers or the other housewives. It's also worth considering that Brandi was pregnant at the time, though she didn't know it, so that could have been a factor in her emotional state and unwillingness to really engage. But she was mostly a dark cloud this season, which really brought the show down, as her and LeeAnne had been the ones doing the heavy lifting across the show's run. But while Brandi seemed to show remorse and shame over her actions, our last housewife went in the total opposite direction. When Tiffany invited the ladies out for a dim sum brunch, Kameron started to show some cracks. Tiffany had fun with the brunch and was very eager to invite the ladies into her Chinese culture, but when she insisted they all try chicken's feet, Kameron threw a fit. This could have been just a silly one-off scene, but Kameron chose to really go in on it and doubled down, accusing Tiffany of being the racist one on the show and of evoking harmful stereotypes on social media. She also went on Watch What Happens Live and compared Tiffany to the performers in the ping pong show she saw in Thailand and called her bossy. She seemed to have a weird vendetta against Tiffany, and it was confusing where it stemmed from, because going into the season, it would have seemed like the two would have been close, given their Valley Girl twangs and their love of fashion. Though things settled down a bit on the show and the two were able to mostly peacefully coexist, things got downright nasty on social media. At the reunion, Kameron tried to channel Elle Woods by attempting to mount a case against Tiffany as a cyberbully and a racist, but it ended up completely backfiring on Cam, making her look ridiculous. Things only got worse when her husband and brother-in-law got involved, going so far as to tag Tiffany's place of employment in tweets calling her racist. The tweets almost seemed satirical in that they called anti-racism racist towards white people, which implies that he as a white man is racist. It was completely illogical. Kameron also seemed to take offense to Tiffany tweeting the clown emoji at her, bizarrely interpreting it as an attack on her race as well. The whole thing was nasty and unhinged, and eventually Bravo had to release a statement in support of Tiffany. I think this was ultimately the final nail in the Real Housewives of Dallas's coffin, because with a dynamic that toxic, it's hard to get to a healthier place without a total overhaul. Another issue with Dallas is that it was pretty sparse on memeable type moments. I think a huge factor in these shows' popularity are the quotes that come from it. Bravo fans love tweeting out the silly things the women say or buying t-shirts and mugs with their catchphrases. With Dallas, these moments are few and far between and come almost exclusively from LeeAnne. The ones that really come to mind is when LeeAnne, under the spell of anesthesia, talked about her favorite weapon.
I grew up with a lot of things in my hands. They're not knives. Just hands. But they work quite well.
As well as spread gossip about Mark Deuber.
Her husband gets his sucked at the round. I know boys who do it.
Her rant on how exhausted she was also a memorable moment.
I'm exhausted. My weave is exhausted.
Sit the down and shut up.
The panty liner on my underwear is exhausted.
But aside from that, what are we left with? I'm not saying the women aren't funny or aren't characters, but without a Dorinda or a Nene spewing out one-liners, the show is not going to get as much steam on social media, which helps cement the love fans have for a franchise. Alright, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about another reason why the show may have flopped, which isn't really the cast members or producers' fault, but it's that the show is never put on Hulu. Aside from DC, every other franchise has all of its back seasons put on Hulu. I think this is a pretty major misstep for whoever is in charge of distributing the show, as it's how many people find it in the first place. A growing number of us are ditching cable in favor of streaming services, and Hulu is one of the most popular ones for Americans. It allows people to binge watch the show and lets them become completely absorbed in the lives of those on screen, getting us incredibly hooked. I think another benefit of having the show on Hulu is that it makes it easier for people to rewatch. I know I'm not alone in putting on the Housewives as I fall asleep, but since they're not as easily available, the Dallas ladies are never the ones to whisk me off into dreamland. The show is on Hulu and Peacock, so it's not totally hard to track down, but I do think this is a factor in the show's demise. Alright, so let's go through the cast and determine who worked and who didn't. The main character was almost always LeeAnne Locken when she was on the show, and the show certainly suffered when she left, even if her firing was justified. She had a legitimately interesting backstory, but rammed it down the other housewives and our throats to the point where it lost a lot of its impact. She would also bring up incredibly dark things at inappropriate moments, which I get as a result of her trauma, but it also made scenes a bit uncomfortable and unnecessarily heavy at times. I do think that she could be a lot of fun, and I liked seeing her work the charity scene and social climb, but she also had an aggressive side that could sometimes get a bit overwhelming. Nearly every season, there was some issue where she threatened to kill someone. Of course, she wasn't making serious homicidal plans, but it's still a bit alarming to the other women. Still, I found her ability to socially maneuver pretty interesting. She could get her allies to be incredibly loyal, and there were a few times that the show would open up and suddenly someone new is a diehard LeeAnne ally, though it wouldn't usually stick long as she riled others up so easily and caused so much drama. She also wasn't afraid to antagonize the other ladies and stepped into her villainy all while putting on a show. I mean, she showed up to Stephanie Hollman, who's the sweetest housewife ever's house dressed as a two-faced version of her. She would really commit to her antics, which I appreciate. She was definitely the lead of the show, but the problem is that she's not very rootable. I could be alone in this, but she never completely found her way into my heart the way someone like Teresa from Jersey or Vicky from OC did, to where I could see past some of the more unsavory things about them because they'd endeared themselves to me so much. But let's move on to Brandi Redmond, who was the other lead on the series, at least for the first few seasons. As I mentioned earlier, Brandi wasn't born into high society, but unlike LeeAnne, she never gave in to the established social order and provided a great foil to the high society ladies like LeeAnne and Kameron. She also really showed us a lot. Her first season, she opened up about the marriage troubles she was facing, and throughout her time on the show, she led us into her miscarriage and her sudden adoption in season 3. We saw the hardships she faced as a mother, and she let us in as she faced her racism scandal in a video that surfaced of her husband with another woman. She also was almost always involved in the drama, with LeeAnne as her biggest adversary, though she fought with nearly every woman that was ever cast on the show. Despite all this, I'm not sure if Brandi ever reached fan favorite status with the viewers, but seeing her check out in season 5 made it clear just how much she brought to the show. I think by the end, she was just over all of the prodding into her life, especially after both of those videos surfaced. I think it's a shame that we couldn't maintain the spunky, fiery Brandi we had in the earlier seasons, as I really think she brought something unique to the Housewives universe. She had a very youthful energy, and her cheerleader past was very Texas. But let's talk about her BFF Stephanie, who, as I mentioned before, is one of the sweetest housewives of all time. What I like most about Stephanie is how self-aware and grounded she is despite the massive wealth she married into. She talks pretty frequently about how she knows this isn't normal, which provides a nice contrast to some of the women who aren't quite as in touch. She also really lets the audience into her mental health struggles, which can be quite difficult to open up about and we don't see come up on a lot of housewives shows. She was often the voice of reason, and the other women usually looked ridiculous when fighting with her because it was hard to see her as anything but a sweetie. She was a great example of the bestie housewife archetype, where we see women like Robin Dixon and Dolores Catania. She started to get a little heat when she joined in on the gang up of Tiffany Moon in season 5, and got caught in her hypocrisy when she criticized Tiffany for showing off her closet and home, yet it turns out Stephanie had done the same thing. I think it would have been interesting to see her on the show without Brandi to see if she could really hold her own, but as of now, it looks like we may never know. Let's move on to Kameron Westcott, who joined the cast in season 2. Kameron for a long time was a really fun character. She adored everything pink, and we were invited along on her boss babe journey as she tried to manufacture pink dog food. We saw her annoy her family, hire pet psychics, and get into the silliest of drama with the other ladies. For the first few seasons, Kameron's biggest crime was seeming a little put on.
And if you want to know what FOMO is, it's fun of missing out.
It's fear.
Oh!
This all came to a halt with her treatment of Tiffany, and now she just may be one of the most hated housewives, except for with the Kelly Dodd crowd. What gets me is just how unnecessary the whole thing was. Is she really that out of touch to not see that way she was treating Tiffany was abhorrent, or at the very least that it wouldn't go over well with the audience? She acted so sure she was in the right, which was confusing, as she understood that the way LeeAnne behaved towards Cary the prior season was wrong. After my rewatch, I think that one of Kameron's biggest triggers is when her intelligence is questioned. Her first tagline actually makes note of this.
Dumb blondes get noticed. Smart blondes get everything.
But as the series progresses, she kind of devolves into this airhead type of figure, which again feels like a bit of an act. We saw a few instances. For example, she got upset when she felt like she was tricked at Brandi's Bruin reveal party. And then with Tiffany, who is very clearly intelligent and has the resume to back it up, she couldn't handle the way she thought she was being perceived. She got really worked up whenever Tiffany corrected her grammar or vocabulary, so I think it may have started off with that. I think others may have been gassing her up behind the scenes with regards to Tiffany as well, as it was so strange for her to be so confidently incorrect about the situation. It's such a shame that Kameron went the way she did, as her legacy on the show has really been tarnished. While we're here, let's talk about Tiffany Moon. Now, full disclosure, I'm a Tiffany stan. I think she's so entertaining, funny, and smart. I loved her family and thought her daughters were the most precious children on Bravo. I also found her personal storyline of working as a doctor during the pandemic while feeling guilt about not being there for her family to be really compelling. I was also very interested in the dynamic between her and her mom. With the other ladies, I enjoyed her as well. She exemplified how overwhelming it must be to be filmed on a show like this, and I saw myself in her emotional moments with the other women. I think the problem with season 5 is that she was immediately on the defense and forced to confront racism against her own culture right from the very first scene. She had to deal with abating Brandi's emotions while also navigating her own. She really only had an ally in D'Andra and Mama D. I think that had the show continued, Tiffany could have risen in the social order, and with season 7 or 8, she could have had all the makings to be the center star. I have to think that if a reboot happens, she'll be one of the first ones called. But let's move on to D'Andra. I think D'Andra has led one of the most interesting lives of any housewife. She's a member of an established Dallas dynasty. She's worked in politics, has a skincare line, is well-traveled, she's smart and funny. She has all the chops to be such a top-tier housewife, but there's just something missing that stops her from stepping into that true alpha center star girl. I think in part having a mother like Mama D who's so domineering has shaken her confidence a bit. She's still a bit in the daughter role, despite having led such a full life. She also came in as LeeAnne's BFF, so she had to act as her lackey for a bit before the two had a massive falling out and she came more into her own. I think if the series had continued, she'd be locked in going forward and would have risen in the ranks, especially if Stephanie and Brandi exited. I do really like D'Andra and think her inclusion in the series really helped it gain the wow factor it needed. Let's take a quick moment to talk about Tiffany Hendra, who was only on the first season. I think that she had kind of one of the worst experiences on the Real Housewives of Dallas, given that she's not really remembered, but what did come out is that she was in adult videos in her past. I did kind of like her, though. I think that she was a great ally for LeeAnne. She was really loyal, and we actually saw her pop up a few times throughout this season's run after she exited. And I also enjoyed her husband, nicknamed Keith Suburban, who was a rock star. I thought she was fine on the show, but I didn't really miss her when she was gone. And lastly, the Carys. First, Cary Deuber, who was an OG, a nurse, and the wife of a plastic surgeon, which always adds a fun element to any franchise. I thought Cary D was fine. She had a cute daughter, and I liked the random Swiss and Danish vibes she brought. Her husband created a lot of Michael Darby-esque drama, which was entertaining for us, probably not so much for them. She was also pretty good at stirring the pot. I did like her on the show, but I didn't feel much either way with her exit. Kary Brittingham definitely brought a unique energy to the show. She almost felt like a teenager to me. She looked phenomenal and partied incredibly hard. She brought us into Mexican culture a bit, which was cool, until of course LeeAnne made it toxic, but that obviously isn't Kary's fault. I also think she had a bit of difficulty reading social cues, which at least made for conflict. I also really enjoyed her daughter, so it seems like she's a good mom. She obviously had a lot going on off camera and that her marriage was falling apart, so it's likely that that was the reason why she was acting out a lot in season 5. If the series had continued on for season 6, I could have gone either way with her returning or not. A lot of the fandom turned on her for not supporting Tiffany and fighting so hard with D'Andra, but I don't think it's anything that wasn't fixable. So to finish out, I think it's such a shame they couldn't get Dallas right. The city has such a unique character, and I'm sure there are a lot of women in the city that would make for fantastic television. I'd been fairly down on the franchise, as you may have sensed if you watched my video on the best place to start each franchise, but while rewatching the series in preparation for this video, I found myself really enjoying the show. I think season 2 is such a great entry into the Housewives oeuvre, but the show definitely had gotten too toxic by the time it was placed on hold. I think there's a chance it could come back to Peacock, as we saw with Miami. I also think there's some legs to the DC rumors as well, so I don't think it's necessarily the last we've seen from the Dallas ladies. So let me know in the comments if there's anything I missed that led to Dallas's failure. And if you liked the video, please subscribe to my channel and give the video a thumbs up. And feel free to DM me if you ever want someone to chat about Housewives with. I'm super passionate about it, obviously. I'll put all of my socials in the description of this video. All right, well, that does it for this video. I'll see you in the next one, though. Bye.